As you continue working on your monograph evaluation assignment, it is a good time to practice identifying and applying the theoretical lenses I have introduced in our class. Remember, you are asked to select appropriate theoretical lenses, plural, and apply them in your evaluation of the environmental dilemma featured in your chosen monograph. For practice, this video leads you through a similar exercise applied to a case study. Consider reforestation efforts in the country of Haiti. Haiti occupies the western part of the island of Hispaniola featured here on the map of the Caribbean. Haiti is the part of this island that was colonized by the French, while the eastern side of the island, present-day Dominican Republic, was colonized by Spain. There is archaeological evidence that the pre-colonial Arawak peoples of Hispaniola successfully managed island forests. But upon colonization, the Spanish exported timber from the east side of the island, while the French clear-cut forests to replace them with profitable sugarcane, coffee, and indigo dye producing plantations. In the 1800s, foreign lumber companies were invited in, and they clear-cut the remaining hardwood stands without replanting any of the trees. So by the mid-1900s, there were scant remaining old-growth forests in Haiti, and the ones that did luckily remain were located in difficult-to-harvest places like mountainsides, and these places tended to be owned by the government. Former plantations, due to monocropping, were stripped of soil nutrients. And as we've talked about many times before in our class, deforestation allows erosion of topsoil, which also strips the land of nutrients to support agriculture. Nevertheless, rural families in Haiti own small plants of land on which they attempt to grow cash crops. Crop yields were declining by the mid-1900s noticeably due to soil degradation. This was an incentive for rural families to try to earn extra income by poaching wood. So they would sell the timber that they cut, or they would make charcoal for sale as fuel. Also, there was a rural to urban migration as people fled from rural areas where life was more difficult to the promise of wage labor in cities. And as city populations expanded, there was increased demand for construction because people needed places to live, and for charcoal to use as fuel and stoves for people living in the city. All of these things threatened the remaining trees. Today we're going to hear a lot from Professor Gerald Murray of the University of Florida, who is an anthropologist that worked in Haiti, specifically studying reforestation efforts for many years. Here's our first quote from Professor Murray. He says, "Poorer sectors of the peasantry in the rural areas respond to this market by racing each other with axes and machetes to cut down the few natural tree stands remaining in remoter regions of the Republic. The proverbial snowball in Hades is at less risk than a tree in Haiti." Deforestation in Haiti was a notable problem, such that by the 1970s, the Haitian government attempted a variety of reforestation campaigns. These included the funding of state-run nurseries where saplings were cultivated, public education programming relating trees to erosion prevention and the hope of soil regeneration, which could increase crop yields for farmers. And rural landowners were asked to plant these saplings, but they were reluctant to do so. And these top-down government reforestation efforts failed miserably. Rural farmers didn't want giant trees to take up any of the limited space on their small family farms that could otherwise be planted with cash crops. Duh! Farmers also perceived that the government intended to retain ownership of the trees. So, other than being a good citizen, the farmer wasn't getting anything in return for all the effort of planting the tree, watering it frequently until it establishes, and caring for it forever. Further, farmers worried that having government trees growing on their land would serve as pretext for the government coming to seize their land in the future. These were all powerful disincentives to participation. With all of these disincentives, the government wasn't having any luck with its original reforestation campaigns, so that's when Gerald Murray was asked to be involved. Here's another quote from our professor. He says that the peasants creatively converted daytime reforestation projects into nocturnal goat forage projects. It was a problem. So after a significant period of fieldwork during which Professor Murray spoke with rural farmers and gained an understanding of the nuances of this situation, he made some recommendations for a different sort of reforestation campaign. Let's first discuss some of the technical solutions he recommended. First, he suggested focusing on non-native trees from around the world that will readily grow and grow quickly in this climate. Using these fast-growing species, they would become harvestable in just 4 years. And also he suggested using types of trees that regenerate even if you cut them down at the base. So perhaps you've witnessed this in your home or garden. You can actually raise some trees right at ground level. And if not treated with chemicals, they regenerate and the tree will grow up from that base. So it's a way of harvesting the timber, and then the tree regenerates every 4 years. He also recommended, for convenience, switching from traditional size saplings that might come in a 5-gallon bucket to micro saplings, shown being held by a small girl in the photo. So micro saplings are lighter, they're easier to transport, and farmers planting them don't have to dig such a deep, large hole. They can dig a shallower pit and easily transport up to 500 saplings at a time. Among the recommendations this environmental anthropologist made, some also addressed the economics perceived by the rural landowners. So remember, some of their disincentives were not wanting to take up space with trees because that would eliminate space for their crops. They were afraid that the government would own the trees even though they themselves are asked to care for the tree and plant it. So there was a rebranding of the trees in this scenario. Some of these economic solutions taught border planting techniques and intercropping that allowed farmers to retain 4/5 of their land for cash crops while interspersing up to 500 trees on these small family farms. It was made clear that the landowner also owns the tree, not the government. And trees were rebranded as cash crops, replacing that older messaging relating trees to erosion prevention and soil regeneration, which is all true, but perhaps not as sexy as of a message and less of an incentive. So if you're able to sell your 500 trees for profit, there's an economic incentive to participate in the reforestation program. This image shows intercropping, where the landowners are incorporating fast-growing trees along with this blanket of cash crops shown in the foreground. Professor Murray explains that the goal was to capitalize on the pre-existing fuel, that charcoal, and lumber markets to make the wood tree one more crop in the income-generating repertoire of the Haitian peasant. Even with all of these solutions in mind, both technical and economic incentive solutions, there were political challenges to implementing such a reforestation project in Haiti. One was the Duvalier dictatorial regime, which you may or may not have heard of, and a history of international aid being pilfered by bureaucrats. And so a solution to this anticipated political corruption that would embezzle funding from reforestation projects included getting funds from USAID that were administered by Murray, an American, even though his only qualification was his anthropology dissertation on Haitian rural cash cropping communities. Lucky him, he got a job. So he headed up this program, hired 5 helpers, none of whom were Haitians. Oh dear. But they were all great listeners. They approached local communities, answered people's questions, and they helped families calculate their expected returns on tree harvests. And of course, they gave away the micro saplings for free. Here are some key outcomes that demonstrate the success of the Haitian Tree Project. By the end of its first year, 1 million trees had been planted by around 2,500 different families. By the end of year 2, 3 million trees had been planted, and seedling production had to be scaled up to meet the increasing demand. Professor Murray notes that some cultivators who had not signed up on the first lists were actually stealing newly planted seedlings from their neighbors' fields at night. Their pilfering was dramatic proof of the bullseye nature of the anthropological predictions that underlie the project. By the end of the 4th year, 20 million trees had been planted by 75,000 households enthusiastically. Here are some of the economic outcomes of the Haiti Tree Project. Most of the trees survived to age 4, which is the age, remember, where they can be harvested. And as expected, some trees were harvested for pole wood, which is very lucrative. That's what the image shows. These poles get sent to a sawmill that slices them into construction-grade lumber for sale. Other trees were sold for charcoal, which is less lucrative but still turns a profit. What was unexpected was that fewer trees were harvested than possible. Families chose to allow their trees to keep growing, even though, remember that these are regenerative trees. You can saw them off at the base, selling that tree for profit, and it will renew itself in another 4 years. So it's not like you're killing your tree and have to replace it with a new sapling. So why did families not harvest all the lucrative tree opportunities that they had access to? Understanding this mystery of why families weren't cutting down all the trees they had available to sell required gaining additional context. And it turned out that this relevant context had to do with a pandemic that was occurring in the 1960s and 70s, a pandemic of a particularly virulent strain of H1N1 influenza that didn't kill a lot of people, but was particularly dangerous for pigs. This strain of influenza that affected pigs, like hogs that would be slaughtered for pork, arrived to the Caribbean in the 1970s. And this made the U.S. pig market on guard. Turns out that Haiti exported most of its pork to the United States, so the U.S. was the main trade partner of Haiti for pork. In an abundance of caution, the U.S. demanded that every single pig in Haiti be culled. In order to protect the U.S. pork industry from infection, because the fear was that infected pork imported from Haiti would arrive in the U.S. and somehow infect U.S. pigs, and then there would be this epidemic in the U.S. costing U.S. pig farmers millions of dollars in losses. Imagine how this affected Haitian pig farmers. Consider these two graphs. The two columns on the left in the first graph displays the percentage of households in just one community within Haiti that had pigs. And what you see before 1982, before this culling event, nearly all households, nearly 100%, had at least one pig. But after 1982, significantly fewer households did. And that's because they had to cull all their pigs, disinfect their farm, and then purchase new certified, quote, clean pigs to replace them with, and that was expensive. So not all families could afford to replace the pigs that they had lost. Now turn your attention to the graph on the right. These are the average number of pigs per household in this community, before versus after 1982, and because replacement pigs were expensive, notice that whereas people had up to 10 pigs or more, 10 was the average, after 1982 that average goes way down. This was economically devastating to Haitian farmers, and it turns out that they had been using pigs as a type of literal piggy bank. They kept pigs and didn't necessarily slaughter them on a routine schedule, but if their crop harvest was lower than anticipated, then they had this second option of selling their pigs for slaughter to make up that economic difference for their family. So think of these pigs as a literal piggy bank. I almost forgot to tell you one of the most interesting tidbits of this case study. After the 1982 culling event demanded by the U.S. government, Haitian pig farmers could purchase certified clean pigs to replace those that they had lost. Now, where do you think those certified clean pigs came from? The U.S. How do you think that made Haitian farmers feel? So the devastating pig culling event happened in 1982. And this, by chance, coincided with the beginning of Professor Murray's tree restoration project. Because crop failure was so frequent, and now pigs were out of the picture for most Haitian families, these free saplings, these trees, replaced pigs as a banked resource. So some of the trees were saved and allowed to keep growing even past when they could be technically harvested, because the literal piggy bank converted from pigs into trees. These images are interesting because they show intercropping. Notice how the trees don't prevent traditional crops from being grown on the ground level, simultaneous to the trees growing. Next, for practice, I encourage you to really take out a sheet of paper and analyze the Haitian reforestation dilemma and its tree project solutions from each of these theoretical perspectives. I think there are clear ties to political ecology and cultural ecology. Hopefully you paused the video if you need more time. But to brainstorm, here are some relationships of this situation to the historical and contemporary forces that constrain and incentivize people's options. For instance, this history of French colonization and foreign lumber companies being invited in deforested Haiti. It removed most of Haiti's trees. Foreign aid for restoration projects was untenable during the corrupt political regime of Duvalier. Farmers in the rural countrysides experienced difficulties related to living there and were inspired to migrate to cities, which increased demand for lumber related to construction and fuel. Farmers feared loss of their land rights and loss of crop profits when they were asked to participate in those original government-run reforestation campaigns. Then recall that the U.S. applied political pressure to cull pigs in 1982. Then that loss of pigs incentivized farmers to use trees as their backup resource instead. Intercropping allowed the addition of trees without interfering with normal crops. The tree types chosen minimized fixed costs related to the time between when the tree is planted and when it can be harvested, and that regenerative capacity of trees, so it's not one and done. It's this renewable resource. And I've run out of room, but perhaps you brainstormed additional relationships between this political ecology theoretical perspective and the example featured in this case study. In terms of cultural ecology, my list was somewhat shorter. When thinking about cultural ecology, consider whether people's cultural practices, their traditional life ways appear to match local conditions. So these, for our class, could be ecological conditions, but they may also be social environment conditions. So I noticed that in this scenario, crops frequently fail. I assume that has to do with the climate, with weather patterns in Haiti. And so people needed a backup resource. They couldn't rely on crops alone. I noticed that the species of trees chosen for the successful reforestation campaign were ones that thrived in the local habitat. That makes sense. They shouldn't try to plant trees that wouldn't successfully grow there. And then I noted something interesting about thieving and people, the one quote mentioned that people went over to their neighbors and dug up their saplings and replanted them in their own yard. And that made me curious about learning more context of Haitian culture related to the perception of private property. And I suspect if we looked into this further, there would be some interesting cultural ecology considerations. So I'm curious what you came up with. This was just one exercise. You're asked to now apply the same type of analysis to your monograph. Good luck, and I look forward to reading those assignments.